And so the more I do this shadow work, the more I look at these deep, dark places that are uncomfortable. They're scary. You get into scarcity, you get into fear, you get into us versus them. And us versus them will always surprise you. You may not even realize you have an us versus them inside you, but we do. It'll suddenly pop up and you're like, oh, look at that. Well, those are shadow traits. And shadow traits don't mean anger, jealousy, upset, discrimination. That isn't just that, but it can also be accommodating people because we don't want to say no. We're like, oh no, I have to say yes. I have to do this for people or they're going to hate me. Well, that's shadow work. One of my favorite ways of working with shadow work with spiritual people is they come to me and they're like, I've been doing my spiritual work for years. I've been meditating. I have been doing this stuff and that stuff. But the other day, I just got so mad at somebody and I yelled at them. And that just means I'm still connected to lower level energies. That means I'm still a lower level being. And I'm like, wait, why did you yell at this person? And then we get into what their anger was about and realize their anger was about boundary. They found a boundary, they set a boundary, they were protecting themselves. The anger wasn't the shadow. The shadow was the guilt, the negative self talk that they're this lower level being, that they're an awful person because they got angry. That was the shadow.
Welcome to a Broaderlands podcast. The opinions expressed on Broaderlands podcast are those of the guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or Broaderlands podcast. Kaedrich, thanks for coming on Broaderlands podcast. It's an honor. I look forward to it.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. I've been listening to you over the years on Gaia, and I just love everything you have to say. I can't even believe you're on here right now. I love learning from you. You're a very brilliant mind, so thank you.
I
Maybe
appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. And maybe we can get started. You can share a little bit about who you are and what you do, if you don't mind.
Sure. I have a hat in a number of places. It's an interesting way to put that. I teach people how to coexist with the paranormal so that they can learn that the paranormal is a normal, natural part of our world and that their paranormal gifts are completely normal and safe to use. I do shadow work, which is where we go to the deeper, darker places in our inner world to really get connected to the gifts that we're hiding and to address some of the more uncomfortable feelings and behaviors and beliefs that we have so that we can find out why they're there and how they're serving us. And plus, I've been really helping awakening starseeds to discover their purpose, their place in this world. It was something really kind of a surprise that I've started working with, but my guides led me there, said, hey, here, you need to be doing this work. And so it's always evolving. The work is always growing and shifting. And I really got my start teaching Norse mysticism, like runes, and the way to work with the Norse deities like Odin and Thor so that they're effective in our lives. So I've been doing a lot of stuff over the years, and it just keeps evolving and growing.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe you can walk us into your upbringings. How was it? Were you were raised with the paranormal, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That's absolutely correct. I like to say I had a paranormal life. I was born into a paranormal life. And that's quite literally because the house I grew up in was haunted. If you were watching TV, you could see the dial. The dial would physically change. It was back in those old days where we had to walk across the room to change the TV station. Well, you could see the dial changing. The radios would turn on in the middle of the night. My mom collected music boxes. And the music boxes, it wouldn't be like just one. It would be like several would go off all the time.
Wow.
You'd hear footsteps walking up and down the hallway. And when I told my parents I was starting to communicate with these spirits and I was starting to really understand who they were, and it wasn't like a kid playing with an imaginary friend. It was actual higher level beings, higher level entities. My parents made sure that we went to a spiritualist church, which is a lot like your typical Protestant church. The typical stand up, sit down, hear a lecture, stand up, sing, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the sermon, 1 to 3 channelers would go up on stage at the end of the sermon and at the end of the service, and they would do trance channeling. Every Saturday night in the church basement, there was seance. A lot of it was channeled, but there was other work that we did there too. And my mom made sure to put me in psychic development classes so that I knew really how to use my abilities and work with my abilities. So quite literally, I grew up with this. This is a natural, normal part of my world. And what really enhanced it was my parents' basement. I lived in the basement when I was growing up. And it was like a library down there. All of the walls were just covered with shelves full of books, like rows and stacks of books of everything you could think about. And of course, I was drawn to the esoteric, the magic, the spiritual books. And one of my favorites, even as a young teenager, was Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. I learned so much from that book about how different cultures and different mystery schools saw the world and saw their spiritual connections and saw their conscious development. And it was a little confusing because it seemed like they were all kind of saying the same thing. They were all trying to reach the same sort of place, but they were using different words, different techniques, different terminology to try to get there. So I said, okay, to help ease the confusion, I need to choose one path, one direction, so that I have the foundation, so I have this understanding for myself. And that's where I chose the Norse path, because pieces and parts fell into place. Where I was picking up and learning the runes, I was reading the mythology, I was studying how that worked, and my guides were leading me on that path. So I took a full plunge into it. I was reading every book I could on it. I was reading all the scholarly studies. I learned the Old Norse language so I can do my own translation of Old Norse texts. And it wasn't just enough to learn what the Old Norse people did and what they believed. It had to be applicable in our world today. So I really worked to have like one foot in the Old Norse world and one foot in the modern world and say, how can we apply these concepts into this world? And so I taught that for a long time. And that was the primary modality, the primary thing I was teaching. And then I got into transpersonal hypnotherapy. I learned that, and that was a really successful program. And by chance, I happened to do a seance with a celebrity. She's a pretty well-known psychic, and she's a real good friend of mine now. And after the seance, some paranormal investigators came up and talked with her and I, and they were talking about some of the problems that they were having, the attachments they were getting, the attacks that they were having. And to me, because I grew up with this was a normal part of my work. This is stuff I work with people all the time. I was just like, okay, here's what you do. Here's how you take care of it. And, it's a simple, obvious thing to me, but it was a surprise to them. They were like, what? How do you do that? What? How? And I'm like, oh. So continuing those talkings, I realized there was an area of my expertise and my experience that I was neglecting. So I started to teach paranormal investigators how to go into haunted locations to keep themselves safe so that they get the data clean. Because if you have an attachment, it'll mess up your data like crazy, and how to avoid attacks. And that led on to me teaching people how to do seance, basic seance and more advanced seance with a black mirror, and develop their paranormal abilities and work with the paranormal. And all the while I'm teaching all of these spiritual practices, I'm seeing people hitting the same roadblocks, like the same ceiling, the same fumblings, places where they just can't seem to get through it. And even I had to go through a dark night of the soul for 3 years. I made some decisions that everything fell apart underneath me, which looking back in hindsight was a good thing. So I learned shadow work as a means to get through some of these blocks. And for example, in working with the paranormal, most people's experience with the paranormal is what they see in TV shows and horror movies. So they think when they get that feeling that they're not alone, in the middle of the night, they're hanging out, and they get that feeling that they're not alone, something's there with them, and maybe they see a book move or they see something happen in the room, they instantly go to, oh, this is a demonic presence trying to attack me, and they go into a super fear state. Well, that's shadow work. We work to get through that. Or if we're sitting down with like a Ouija board, I got a Ouija board behind me. We're sitting down with that, and then the fear starts to well up. It's because of those movies. So we start to work through what those fear states are. So you're producing only positive energy and connecting with positive entities. And that also helps to unlock the blocks to certain spiritual states of being. People think, I don't deserve this. I'm not a guru. I'm not this adept spiritual leader. Well, who cares? You're still capable of reaching those higher states. And so we work through the shadow work to get there. And it's just been this step-by-step progression of me learning, like, oh, here's the next step I need to learn for me. Here's the next step I need to start teaching and growing with in teaching these people. So even through that dark night of the soul, it really reinforced my path, my purpose in this life is to teach people how to access their spiritual gifts and to help them learn to clear the distortions and any of the blocks preventing them from being who they authentically are and living their life authentically as a fully awakened, connected spiritual being.
Appreciate it. You brought up Manly P. Hall's book. Before Jordan Maxwell passed away, I got to spend a little time with him at one of the conferences and chat with him for a few days, and it was pretty cool to just see him back and forth and have some good conversations. And I just trip out how since my awakening, how everything's changed for me. Like my heroes are guys like you and Jordan Maxwell and Manly P. So I take off those Michael Jordan, no offense to Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, who were once my heroes, and I replace them with you because I'm so into this. I'm a whole different person, and spirituality and spiritualism, for some reason, I feel goes together. And sometimes people in the spiritual community might like not want to talk about spiritualism or the paranormal, and ghosts and all that. They like separate it, but for me, it all flows together. Maybe you can touch on that a little bit more. How does that all blend in together?
Absolutely. I agree with you. You see, we hear the phrase all the time, and I'm sure you've heard it, that we're spiritual beings having a human experience or having a physical experience. I completely reject that. That's not true. What is true is we are spiritual and physical beings. We're both, and we're having a dynamic experience. What happens in the spiritual affects the physical. What happens in the physical affects the spiritual. The Buddhists have a really good way of explaining that. If you want to know what you were, who you were in a past life, look at what your life is like now. And if you want to know who you're going to become in a future life, look at how you're living that life right now. So that is something that you carry with you from lifetime to lifetime, not necessarily your identity, not necessarily your concrete memories, but who you are, what you're doing, why you're doing it is what you carry with you. And so there is this dynamic processing back and forth. So you are a paranormal entity. You just happen to be coexisting in a physical body that is translating and transducing energy back and forth. And that's the same way with the world around us. We exist with paranormal beings everywhere. Supernatural entities are everywhere. And some people say you have to wait till nighttime till they're out. Well, that's not true. Some people say you have to wait till midnight, or the new thing is 3 a.m. Like 3 a.m. is the witching hour now or something. Or if in a cemetery. And we use the metaphor of the veil. Like the veil is thinnest around Halloween. The veil is thinnest around Walpurgisnacht or at midnight. And really what the veil is, the veil doesn't exist. What the veil is your ability to tune in or to tune out to your spiritual gifts, to the spiritual world around you. Because you are a spiritual being, you are endowed with subtle senses. We call it clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairgustance, all of clairsentience. We have our clair senses, which is basically you can think of the sensory processing of your spiritual body, your spiritual being. Just like we have eyes and ears and a nose and mouth that are sensory organs for the physical body, you have subtle senses as well. And that's how you know you are a spiritual being and a physical being. And if you are denying your paranormal abilities, if you're denying your connection to spirits and to ghosts and to these entities that are all around you, you are denying a good chunk of who you are as a living being, as a sentient and sapient being. You're completely denying that. You're cutting yourself off from this vast, amazing world, which will give you guidance and clarity, the direction that you need to get through difficult situations. And we can even take this a little bit in a different direction. Our world is not only filled with entities and beings of all kinds, little tiny low-level thought forms that are influencing the way we feel and the way we think, egregores, which are influencing our belief patterns. We're also inundated with reality bubbles and energy fields that surround us everywhere, to the point where it's really believable that 90% of the things that you are thinking and feeling are not even yours. They're coming from the subtle whispers of these entities, everything from thought forms to higher level guides and your higher self, energy fields. These are influencing the way you think and feel. And if you don't have an awareness to that, if you have zero compunction to tune into that one, they're just going to influence you at the subconscious level, at the unconscious level. You're going to think everything going through your head and your feelings and your behaviors, beliefs, you're going to think it's all yours. So you're going to beat yourself up for what you're doing. You're going to say you're the problem for all these things, which you might be, but you're not taking full responsibility for who you are and your place in the world, and you're subject to these unseen influences that are just an inherent part of existing, period.
Thank you. You talked about egregores. Maybe you can touch more on that for those who may not know what an egregore is. And what's the difference between an egregore and a thought form?
Okay, that's a great question. In fact, we'll start with thought forms, because I tend to look at these created entities as like almost a hierarchy. And I do want to say that one of the things about human beings is we are powerfully creative entities. Every single one of us, we are creating our reality. We're creating the energy space around us, and we are individually and collectively creating the entities that are influencing us. And we tend to externalize it. We say it's the jinn, it's demons, it's whatever. Well, it's us, okay? We need to take responsibility for us doing it. And where a thought form comes from is anytime we have like a persistent emotional state, and let's just pick on fear. Fear is an easy one to do. Whatever we're afraid of, we'll be producing that energy, because every emotion we feel has an energy output to it. And if you're producing that energy over and over, you'll create a little bundle of energy programmed with fear. And it really has a single program, scare me. And it is not an evil entity. It's not a negative entity. It's just a low-level bottom feeder, is a better way to think of it. And it just exists in the energetic space around you. And when it gets hungry, when it starts to feel its energy is depleted, it pokes you with a little bit of fear energy. And now you don't know why you're afraid. You don't know why you're feeling this fear. You're producing this fear energy around you, and it's getting fed. And this could come at those times where you're sitting around at home alone. It's 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and you're just chilling. You're just doing whatever. And all of a sudden you're like, oh no, what's going on? You're not being attacked. You're getting fed off of by this bottom feeder. And thought forms come in every flavor of the rainbow. Every emotion that you have, they can come in scarcity. Like if you're feeling money scarcity all the time, you don't know why. It's like, no, I see money coming in, but yet, oh my God, well, it's a thought form feeding off of you. It can come in the form of complacency and comfort, where you're going, I don't know why I can't just do something. Why am I just not getting up to do anything? It's like, man, why bother? It's a thought form poking you with that energy so that you get to produce that energy so it feeds off of you. And yes, in a sense, we're externalizing that, but that's not an excuse. That's not an excuse to say, well, I'm afraid or I can't do anything because a thought form is here doing this to me. You can now be aware that there's this influence happening, and you can take charge of your energetic environment and that influence and go, no, I recognize I'm getting poked with this, and I'm making these changes so that it doesn't affect me. I'm doing these things instead of what I'm feeling. I'm getting up to do these things. So you are not absolved of responsibility just because you know there's a thought form or an egregore or something influencing. You have to know about it, and you have to take the steps to do something about it. It's still your responsibility. And that's what leads us to egregores. Egregores are collectively creative entities, communities, all get together, and we share a common vision, a common idea about something. And these beings, these egregores, live off of our beliefs. And we can think, the way I like to describe egregores is if we go all the way back to Paleolithic times, when we had little tribes huddled around a fire late at night, and they are huddling for warmth and safety and protection. All around them are tall grasses. And in the tall grasses, you can hear predators moving around. That's just where they hunt. And now they tell stories to the children. Don't get too close to the tall grass at night because a saber-toothed cat might come and get you, or some sort of predator might get you. And it's true. And so they start to tell these stories that there's some evil creature living out in the tall grasses that steals children at night if you get too close to the grass. And they also learn that if they make offerings to this entity, it might leave their children alone. Maybe they just put out some food and the saber-toothed cat gets it. Doesn't matter. Eventually, this thing, of course, does exist. It does have that potential to harm children, but then it evolves. It evolves with their belief patterns. They're making these offerings to protect their children. They're making these offerings to help protect themselves. And now this entity has become a protector of children, as long as they're making their offerings, because they know it's a saber-toothed cat eating their children, not this evil thing. So they make offerings to protect their children, and as long as they're doing that, their belief patterns are set up. So now their children are safe. We still make egregores like crazy. One of my favorite egregores to talk about shows up on Christmas Eve every night. You ever notice that nice magical Christmas that's in the air? You feel that sense of generosity, that sense of magic, that sense of joy and wonder. And when you leave the milk and cookies out and you put the presents out, you have this elated, wonderful feeling. That's how Santa Claus can visit every home in one night, is because it's an egregore that we all believe in, that we tune into, and we temporarily become Santa Claus. So Santa's an egregore. Santa is real. Egregores also exist in like haunted asylums. You know, when we hear about Penhurst or whatever, awful things happened there. The people who were committed to those places, even the doctors and the orderlies, bad things happened. And so there are spirits remaining in those places that are kind of tortured. They're still living this torment. But we, as the living, tell our stories about Penhurst, about what happened there, about the brutality, about the horrors, about how awful it is. That collective belief creates an egregore. And that egregore lives there. And its job is to continuously feed us our belief patterns. Because if we believe in it, we know it's there, and the investigators go there and they're experiencing the big, dark, scary, nasty thing that's there, it's getting fed by our beliefs. So again, we created that egregore. It's there. It's influencing us. And that's one of the worst part about beliefs is the way our brain works is when you have a belief about something. If you believe in X, you will go out in the world, and if you encounter 1,000 Ys, your brain will ignore 1,000 Ys. But as soon as it finds a single X, it goes, see, I told you, that's how the world works. And so these egregores feed off of that belief. And a lot of times people are like so darn convinced this is exactly how things work. These are angels, these are demons, these are deities, gods or whatever. And they are real in that 4D sense. But at the same time, you created them. You're feeding them. And if you choose to work with them, you can have some majorly beneficial relationships with them, or you can choose not to work with them. Again, it comes to that awareness, and shadow work helps bring you to that place of awareness. So you're no longer bound by the fear of, oh, this is a demon attacking me. You go, no. If I created this, if I'm creating this connection, I'm now empowered to do something about it. And I can take responsibility for my emotions, my beliefs, and my actions, and not blame it on this demon that made me do it. So any of that kind of external blame is bogus. We take charge of that.
Which is my definition of spirituality, is taking responsibility for your own life, your own thoughts, your own actions, your own emotions.
Absolutely agree with you.
One thing I would love to ask you is religion and politics. Can egregores be formed within religions? Is that why they're fighting all the time with each other, killing people in the name of whatever?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Is because if you live inside of a reality bubble that's created by your community, a lot of people are born into a religion that is surrounded by the community around them. First off, it's really scary to go against the community. Because Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we are hardwired from Paleolithic times to need to fit into our community. It's a matter of survival. And so if we go against the religion of our upbringing, we're going against the community, and we face being cast out of that community, which means being abandoned. It literally is at the emotional primal level survival. Your survival is threatened if you go against it. And now here's these other people on the other side of the world that believe something different, but they're just as vehemently held to their beliefs as you are. Well, they're obviously wrong. They're obviously being misled by a demon. Well, no, they're just creating reality. Again, we humans are massive creators. We're powerful creators. And when we can come to understand, like, oh, no, they're literally creating their reality, and their reality is 100% correct, and so is ours. That openness lets us realize, oh, there's other mechanisms going on that creates reality. There's another layer to all of this. If both opposing groups are correct, that means there's still something else going on that we need to understand. And that's where mysticism comes in. And you're right about politics. One of the things I've really come to understand about like the reptilian agenda and about archons, we hear so much about these negative beings that are feeding off of loosh, our negative emotions, our negative energies. Well, yes, they're real. Yes, they are there. Yes, there are reptilian entities influencing our politicians, but where did they come from? They're all egregores. They're all tuned into our attunement. If we want to externalize, well, why would that person be so awful and so mean and so cruel? It must be a reptile. It must be a demon. It must be an archon. And we fully convince ourselves of that because we create reality. And that fits into our reality set. And so when these beings are whispering into our politicians' ears, they're really there. But that doesn't absolve us of responsibility again. Even though I teach people about the paranormal, even though I teach people about our spiritual connection, we have to take responsibility for the physical world. Meaning, somebody calls me up and they tell me that there is a ghost in their house, flickering the lights on and off, flashing the lights like crazy. The first thing I'm going to do is say, okay, great. Did you call an electrician? If I have somebody coming to me and saying they're hearing voices, they're having these seizures, they're having these movements, the first thing I'm going to ask them, quite honestly, and I don't mean it disrespectfully, have you seen a doctor? Have you been diagnosed with any sort of mental illness? Have you gone through the process to eliminate that this is what's going on? And if they say they have, and they've got that clear bill of health, cool, let's work together. Now, 1% of the population or less does have a biological problem with the brain. They really do. There's something off with the brain that prevents them from having empathy for other people, that they only go after what they want. We call it psychopathy. 1% of our population does have these psychopathic tendencies. They will hurt people to get what they want, and they are in positions of power. I really will hold flat out that it is not power that corrupts, but it's the corrupt that seek power. And the absolute corrupt seek absolute power. And we cannot blame an egregore. We cannot blame an archon. We cannot blame a reptile for influencing those politicians. They have psychopathy. They have a mental illness. And it's really hard to discern that, diagnose that. So we have to also keep our feet on the ground all the time when we're doing the spiritual work to realize, no, maybe there really is a mental illness at play here and not a demonic force. So we have to factor in all of these things. There's no one quick fix to anything. We have to really analyze every situation for what it is.
Yeah, thank you. You know, they often talk about these elites. There's the hidden hand, or a group of men behind the curtains controlling the world. Now, my question is, if there is, do they know about how this all works? And is that why we're being fed in the news fear, anger, hatred, discrimination, racism, and so on?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's not necessarily even hidden organizations. They're in plain sight. Because fear is the biggest motivating factor to get people to do something. They are afraid of what could happen to them, what could happen to their loved ones. the fear of us versus them. Oh no, if we don't get them, they're going to get us. And that has long been known to be a motivating factor. Back in the days when Catholicism ruled the ruled the Western world.
Yeah.
And there was no hesitation to fill the pews and the coffers with fear. Oh no, if you don't come in here, the devil's going to get you. And if you don't do these prayers, the devil's going to get you, that sort of thing. And it just is extended into our modern world. We see it on TV. Oh, look at them. They're coming to get you. Oh, gosh, look, they're coming in to get your children. It's not even secret organizations. They're just right out in the open. They're flat out telling you what's going on. And if you watch the news, and I've seen this so many times, the news channels will say, and this is a real thing I've seen, like, this medicine is used by tens of thousands of people every day. Recently, a child died from taking it. Tune in after these commercials to find out if your child is next. I really fully believe that the news media's number one job is to scare you into watching the commercial. And it's not even some subversive agenda. They just want you to watch commercials so that they can get paid. And government officials that are having some of these psychopathic tendencies or other fear of themselves, they are generating fear in the hearts of people so that they stay in a place of power. Wow. And I really don't. You see, when we look at like the Illuminati is a great example of PR, public relations. Because if we look to the actual history of the Illuminati, not the stories we're being told today, but the actual history, in the 1700s, there was something revolutionary invented that changed the world. The scientific method. Being able to have a control group and test against that control group. Well, there was a group of nerds, people who were thoughtful people, gathered together to come up with new ways to use the scientific method, and they called themselves the Illuminati. Yes, they were probably Masons because the Masons were a pretty prominent group for people that were pretty affluent, and it was affluent people that were able to get educated and learn about the scientific method. Well, at this time in the 1700s, who hated the scientific method more than anybody else? The Catholic Church. Why? Because here's this Bible. It tells you all the answers. You just need to come sit in our pews and fill our coffers and you have the answers. How dare you question this book? How dare you question how reality works? So the Catholic Church spun the PR that the Illuminati are evil. They're these evil Masons trying to rule and control you and destroy everything, when all it was is just a bunch of science geeks. That's all it ever really was. And over the years, that just kept spinning and spinning and spinning. And it's that fear. When we are in a fear state, literally the amygdala in our brain shuts down the prefrontal cortex. It literally shuts it down. And when the prefrontal cortex is shut down, you cannot critically think. You cannot critically evaluate a situation. You might not even be remembering what you're afraid of. What gets activated is the lower limbic system and the brainstem. So now you're in a fight or flight situation and you can't think. And when you can't think, you take the voice of authority as the voice of fact. And so if it's news media, if it's a politician, if it's the church official coming in and telling you, oh, they're out to get you, these bad things are coming to get you, look at what they've done, look at what they've done, you shut down and you take their voice of authority and you run with it. And so these groups, they're right out in the open. You just see it on the news and the TV. You see it in the media all the time. They're not hiding. They're controlling you through fear. And if you can't critically evaluate that, if you aren't aware of their fear narrative, you're controlled by it. But if you're aware of like, oh no, I don't have to wait till after the commercial to know about this drug that killed one kid. What's going on here? What's really going on? You transcend that narrative. You transcend above that fear narrative, and you are no longer being controlled by their projections of fear. Again, shadow work. Because you're able to recognize, oh, that's a shadow being projected onto me. They're expecting me to get into a shadow state. Instead, you recognize that. You go, oh, this is a shadow. I'm not being controlled by that. I'm going to get above that, and you can't do anything to me.
Well, thank you. I've had so many different experiences with that, but not acknowledging it like, oh, it's the shadow. But I've just like, you could see, you start to see things that are very limiting and destructive and unhealthy for us as individuals. And I come from like the 12-step community, and there's a belief that you're never cured. Something's always wrong with you. And that belief stems from some guys in 1939 that didn't know everything. They're profound, but there's things that they just had wrong perceptions, misunderstanding. But to hold a belief that something's always wrong with you and you're never cured, that's pretty dangerous, right?
Yes and no. When we come to addiction, I do like to look at addiction as a disease. There is something in the body, and there are genetic markers in the body that will show that there is a proclivity to addictive behaviors. And those addictive behaviors can show up with alcohol, with drugs, with sex, with gambling, with food, with any sort of compulsive behavior. And again, it's that awareness, knowing that there is this proclivity, there is this potential. So you have to be aware that addiction is there. But at the same time, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean there's something broken. It just means here's a tendency for this. And with shadow work, we go to the question of why. Why do I have this compulsion? Why do I have this drive to do this thing? Why am I being pulled in this direction? What is it about me that needs to be? Like if somebody has maybe a food addiction, is there a hole inside that needs to be filled? Great. Let's get to acknowledge that hole. What is that hole that needs to be filled? Why is it there? What does that hole feel like? What is the communication? What's the message of that hole? And when you understand what that hole is, why that part that needs to be filled, you again go, why? Why do I want that filled? You get to understand more about who you are authentically, what that why means. It's like, oh, because I am important in this way. I am valuable in this way. I have these amazing things that are good about me, and I want to feel good. And so we can tap into that now. Okay, great. This is really who I am, and still recognizing there's that genetic potential there. So it is still a constant work. When we do shadow work, we're doing shadow work for the rest of our life. It's never one and done. We are always aware that there are moments that are going to trigger us, people are going to trigger us, or what works for us now, what our baseline is now. When we evolve 5-10 years from now to become a different person, life changes, we're in a different stage, those things don't work. We have to do shadow work to raise ourselves up to that level. And so we're constantly working. It doesn't mean there's anything broken. It doesn't mean there's anything that needs to be fixed. It just means, cool, here's the work that I'm here to do. Here are the things that I'm here to experience. And here's why it's important to do that. Nothing broken, nothing wrong. It's just, this is the experience to go through for this life.
Yeah, thank you. And trauma. I like to ask this question. Do you believe we can bring in past life trauma? I'm pretty sure, I think you touched on it a little bit without bringing that up. But can we bring in past life trauma from in this present life?
I see it all the time. Working with my clients, there are, I don't publicly advertise that I do past life regression, but it is still an important part of the work that I do because it's just one of the tools in the toolbox. Let's put it that way. There are times when doing shadow work with folks or working on certain issues with folks that we just can't get through it. They've seen other people, they've seen other professionals, and they just can't get through this issue. And it's like, okay, let's go to the past life. Let's see where you learned this. And we'll do that. We'll go, when was the first time you learned this trait? Find out it's in a past life. We find out what the issue is, what happened. And then we move to between lives. And that's where the real secret is. It isn't the past life, it's between lives. Because something happened in that lifetime that when we get between lives, we go, I'm never doing that again. I'm not making that choice. That's never happening again. And it could be everything from a physical ailment, saying, hey, there was a wound in my shoulder because I got stabbed. Well, I'm going to remember that so I can protect myself and never let that happen again. It can be an agreement about money. There was this money grubbing miser that just starved our family to death, and we froze to death because they were taking all our money. Well, I don't want anything to do with money. So they make an oath of poverty or something. Or the opposite. They go, I'm going to be that money grubbing miser so that people can't take advantage of me. So we get into this life going, what's going on? Why am I encountering these issues? Well, it's just an agreement that you made, and we can go back and change that agreement. And I literally have seen overnight changes. I've had clients, after we've done a past life regression session, to work through some of this trauma that's come through from a past life. They send me a message the next day. It's like, everything's different. I'm not being triggered by this anymore. This isn't bothering me anymore. My shoulder has completely stopped hurting. What happened? It's like, well, we've removed that factor. So we absolutely do bring past life stuff into our world.
I love when you said earlier, you mentioned if you want to know what your past life was about, look at your present life. And if you want to, you said something about your future life, start making changes now. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and which I found profound about that was I had a past life reading in Cincinnati, and when I was in Cincinnati, I've been to one of those churches as well a couple of times, so I know exactly what you're saying. I experienced it for myself. It was pretty cool, but it was different. But I was at a conference in Cincinnati, and I got a reading, a past life reading, and the lady identified me as a Tibetan Buddhist monk, and she described my personality exactly the way I am today. Same traits, same behaviors, same personality, and I thought that was pretty interesting.
Absolutely. And that is one of the key things is there is a mission across lifetimes. Our soul does have, especially star seeds. I've seen this with star seeds. They are here to fulfill some mission, and it's not a single lifetime thing. They work over a series of lifetimes. But right now is a critical point in human history. So that's why we're seeing a lot of starseed and awakened people right now, is because humanity is evolving to this higher state. And so you will see those same personality traits. You will even sometimes see the same physical traits across lifetimes because it's the same soul bringing their energetic dynamics into the lifetime. And that will show up as personality, that will sometimes show up as physical traits. So absolutely correct. You'll see that. And by the way, I did have a lifetime as a Tibetan Buddhist monk as well.
Oh, that's awesome. One question I would love to ask you. I love your take on this. The ego. Maybe you can help expand. What is the ego?
Ego. This is where we have to look a bit to Freudian psychology, because in these spiritual communities of today's world, we hear so many people dissing the ego, saying we have to get rid of the ego. I even remember like some spiritual teachers going, I've done such work, I no longer have an ego. And I'm like, yes, so why are you on Oprah? Right? So, and when we really look to what ego means, when we go to Freudian psychology, he's identified the ego, the id, and the superego. The id is the part of our psyche that is like the toddler. Gimme, 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 that's mine, mine, mine. I want it. I don't care. Just give me more, 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 more. The superego is our altruistic part, our philanthropic part. It's like it's going to give, give, give. And we can be stuck in either state. Sometimes, especially in the spiritual community, we just give, 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 and give to the point where we're drained. People have a boundary problem. They just can't say no, and they get drained, and then they end up being resentful and hating people because they won't say no because their superego gets in the way. But the ego is the balancer of that. The ego is part of your identity, of who you are. It balances what your needs and desires are with what your capabilities are and what the people need around you. So that ego can be a balance point. It's not really a negative thing. It's a balance point. And when we look to like sacred texts, we hear so much about the phrase I am. We want to be careful about using I am because I am is a manifestation formula. I am wealthy. I am improving in health. We want to be always careful of how we use I am. And if we look to Latin, what is I am in Latin? Ego sum.
Mm.
Ego is a sacred part of who we are. And I'm going to take it a step further and look to Hinduism. Hinduism has two different versions of higher self. There's Atman, which is higher self that lives in the body, that lives in the day-to-day world. This is you accessing your higher mind, your higher capabilities, really using your prefrontal cortex and moving into a higher state. That is Atman in the body. Then there's Brahman, which is like the celestial cosmic higher self. And the Hindus have this saying, and it goes both ways. Brahman is Atman, Atman is Brahman, right? Depending on how you look at it, they're one and the same. So that Atman in the body is also a sacred expression of ego. It is your ego. And the way I want you to start looking at ego is I am as a sacred being, and you make your life a prayer to your own higher self through your own actions. I'll even take this to my realm, the Norse. There are a couple times in the poetic Edda where we come across a phrase like själfur själfa mer, which means a self to the self, or själfur leithu själfen thik, let the self lead the self. That is a reminder of higher self. Surrender to your higher self. Let your day-to-day world go to the higher self. Let the higher self lead you. Let the higher self guide you through that so that your life becomes that prayer. And that is the sacred expression of ego, the sacred expression of I am and who you are in the world. So let yourself have that ego, but beware that it's not self-aggrandizement and it's not id getting out of control, but it is you authentically balancing your needs and desires with your capabilities and what the world around you needs. And when you do that, that's a sacred expression of self through ego.
I really appreciate it, and I love that. Thank you. So it's not edging God out, right?
No, no. It's, I always kind of laugh at some of those things like that when people come up with those phrases. It makes me scratch my head because I'm going to be maybe a little judgmental here. We all do this. I do this too. We have certain models of how the world works. And again, back to, a reality bubbles. And you're 100% correct. But then we'll take things from the world and say, oh, look, I will put this square peg into a round hole and I'll make it fit. And see, look, here we go. And it's like, it works for a little while, but you have to go back to, question, test it, see if it really works and see if it really fits and find. And I think that's one of those examples of a square peg trying to go into a round hole. Just like we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. It's a square peg to a round hole. It's sort of correct, but not all the way.
Yeah, I love your take. I love that because Eckhart Tolle, he talks a lot about the ego or the A Course in Miracles. It has some profound writings, but the only thing I really don't agree with is how the ego's so bad. It's like the devil now, and it's not. It's a sense of self. So yeah, I appreciate your take on it. I really do.
Absolutely, and that sense of self is critical.
Yeah,
it really is critical, and that's why the work that we're doing is so important. Is we get caught up in the altruism. We're here to serve, service to others before service to self, that kind of thing. Sure, I can agree to that, but remember, you are an individual. We all are, because that's our 3D existence. We are an individual, and our karmic agreement to exist in this world, whether you're a starseed or an ascended master or whatever, or just an awakened soul, and I don't mean just, but if you are an awakened soul, you are here experiencing the world as an individual. You are here to do your work as an individual, which means you have every right to put yourself first in doing your spiritual work. Because when you put yourself first and you're doing your shadow work, you're doing your spiritual development for you in a way that makes sense to you, you are like charging yourself up. You're putting yourself with an abundance of energy, an abundance of spiritual resources that affect the people around you in a profoundly positive way. And as you learn to solve those karmic issues that you're here to experience, you learn to work through those karmic debts, you will learn to clear all of that negativity, you're inserting that information into the collective unconscious, making it easier for other people to experience and go through that too. So your service to self in the spiritual work really is service to others. So in that sense, you've got to do your work as an individual, take care of yourself first, and that's how you help other people.
What would you define our higher self? I've heard you talk about this, and I love what you say, so that's why I'm asking.
It's still a nebulous concept. It's a part of your being that exists outside of time. It's a great way to look at it. When we talk about fifth level consciousness, sixth level consciousness, seventh level, that's fine. All of those will work, but what does it mean? We here in the third density see time linearly. Cause and effect has to happen. We're kind of moving in a straight line through time. But if you can get out of that 3D concept of time and you can start seeing like layers of possibility across probabilities, you start to see time in a 3D nature, that you're moving like this through it. And it's all about what your energy is attuned to, how you are aligning your energy. And higher self has that higher perspective. It can see all those possibilities, all those probabilities. And it has like a mission in a sense, so that it can say, great, go here, go here, go there, go there. And connected to that higher self is what I call the oversoul. And I'm not sure if I'm the one who invented it or if I picked up that term. And you can think of the oversoul as like an octopus or a squid. It's this higher level being that exists even beyond like sixth, seventh, eighth density, even beyond that. There's no time, there's no space, there's no reality as we understand it. It's just high level consciousness. And it will stick a tendril through those layers of density. And it says, I want to be a janitor in this lifetime because I want to experience struggle. And I want to be a rock star in this lifetime because I want to experience hedonistic decadence. And in this lifetime, I'm going to be a guru sitting on top of, I'm just kind of making stuff up. And from the higher self's perspective, it's living all of those lives simultaneously. Those are not past and future lives. Those are simultaneous lives. And so imagine if you, in your world today, with some of the things you're struggling, that you're looking to connect with and try to understand, what if you could connect with the future self of this lifetime or a future lifetime? And how did you solve the problems that you're facing now? If you could do the same thing to who you were in the past, going, hey, here's what I learned, here's what I connected with, and make your life easier in a past lifetime. And so you can share information across lifetimes. You can connect with each other, talk to each other, share that information. And like we were talking about bringing trauma from a past life into this lifetime, you could say, hey, here's how you deal with that. You can be your own best like counselor, your own best therapist in a past lifetime, saying, here's what I've learned, here's what we're doing, here's what you can use. And whether that person that you were in that lifetime believes in it or not, you show up in the dreams. You show up in their visions and their little thoughts going, oh, this could be a good idea. So in a weird sense, you yourself, as your higher being, are your own guide, your own best teacher across lifetimes. And so that's why I say it's kind of nebulous, because you're this oversoul. You are this higher being that exists in the between lives world. You are in between lives, communicating across lifetimes with different answers for yourself. So there are multiple layers of what it means to be higher self. And it all starts with just levels of awareness.
Well, thank you. I heard you give a talk on, you talked about karma and reincarnation. I wanted to ask, how do you feel about reincarnation and what's its purpose? But karma used an example with the Dalai Lama, but I totally forgot off the top of my head what the how you used the Dalai Lama example with karma. Do you happen to remember?
Yeah. You see, the Dalai Lama is somebody who's made the personal sacrifice to reincarnate lifetime after lifetime, to teach the same lessons. And that's really like what we're talking about, the mission across lifetimes. His mission is to bring that level of spiritual growth, that level of spiritual peace, and that spiritual understanding. And he's made that personal sacrifice, meaning he can choose any of these one of these lifetimes to stop coming into this world. But the fact that he's a public figure, he's a political figure now, that he's all over the world affecting people, that's karma right there. The actions he's taking is kind of stirring up the karma. He's stirring up the connections. And so that is ensuring him he's coming back for another lifetime. He will be here for another lifetime because he is a public political figure stirring things up. Not everybody agrees with him, and that's fine. That's exactly what needs to happen. And so if he wants to move to that state of nirvana, he wants to get out of this life and not have to ever come back, all he has to do is spend one lifetime as just an unknown person, just to kind of hang out. And it's fascinating in the Hindu tradition and even in the Buddhist tradition, when we're talking about karma, that they believe there are people that have amassed so much good karma that they can't move on. They can't get through this lifetime. And there are people who have amassed so much negative karma that they can't move on. They can't get through to the next lifetime. So what if they get together between lives and make an agreement that the person with all the good karma comes back as a jerk, as a terrible person, and the person with all the negative karma comes back as a victim? and has terrible things done to them, or they're out promoting some super positive, altruistic things, they're going to balance out their karma together and they're going to move on. So what the whole lesson of that is we need to let go of these notions of what it means to be a good person or an evil person. We need to let go of these notions of people living their lifetimes as evil people. Because even the Dalai Lama talks about General Mao. When people ask him what General Mao is like, the Dalai Lama will tell you General Mao is a Buddha in disguise. And people will be like, what? How can he be a Buddha? Look what he did to the people of Tibet. Look at all the suffering and the misery he caused. Look at all of the war and the killings. And the Dalai Lama is like, yeah, but look, up until that point, Tibetan Buddhism was stuck in Tibet. It wasn't going anywhere. It was just this little belief pattern in the Tibetan Himalayas, and it wasn't anywhere. But when Mao came in, when Mao caused the devastation and suffering that he did, Tibetan Buddhism and their spiritual practices is known worldwide. The Dalai Lama is a worldwide figure. None of that would have happened without General Mao causing what he caused. So when we look at that and we go, oh, our heart breaks to the suffering and the misery and the toil that these people endured, yes, feel that compassion. Yes, that was horrible that happened. And look at the powerful results for the rest of the world because that happened. So we can't instantly go, oh, evil, 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 evil. We have to condemn it. We need to step out beyond that narrative, that fear-based narrative, going, that's evil, we got to get rid of it. We go, what's really going on? Ask the question, why? Why is this happening? And sometimes we don't know the answer to why until generations have passed. And we can look back and go, oh, I see why that had to happen.
Yeah, thank you. Before we go, I would love for you to, for my friends and family that probably don't understand still the concept of a dark night of the soul or the shadow work, what the shadow is. Maybe you can re-walk us into that and help broaden our lens on what the dark night of the soul is and what the shadow is and shadow work, how it all works.
Absolutely. The dark night of the soul is a perfect example of why higher self is a jerk. People expect and this is one of the biggest blocks to people connecting with higher self, is they expect higher self to be peace, love, and light, and all compassionate, which it is. But higher self is also a jerk and a butt kicker and can be just an all-around awful thing. And so let's imagine you grew up in the life that you did, whatever that life is, no judgment, no criticism, and you're living how you think you need to be living. You were taught what to think, what to feel, what to believe, and you're doing it, or maybe you rebelled against it. Fine, you created the life that you're created. But higher self said, no, I came into this world to experience this, to do these things. And as you pursue the path that you think you're supposed to be on, higher self says, no, we're going too far the wrong direction. Hit the reset button. And by the reset button, it means everything in your life comes crashing down. You might lose your job, you lose your relationships, you might even be homeless. Some people have been to the verge of suicide because of how bad Dark Night of the Soul is. It's really bad. And again, we got to let go of concepts of evil. This is really higher self saying, no, we're going in the wrong direction. Stop. And when you hit that rock bottom, that serves as a foundation to build something new, to connect with higher self, to say, hey, what should I be doing? Where should I be going? What should I be learning, teaching, and doing? So for me, I thought I was supposed to be a musician. I play music really easily. I read music before words. I still play guitar all the time. I have several musical instruments. I can play lots of it. And I thought I was supposed to go on tour with a band. I thought that was my path. And as I did that, I hit Dark Night of the Soul bad. And it locked me in a Dark Night of the Soul for 3 years because I had my whispers. I had my teacher saying, here's what you do. Here's how you work this. And I'm like, great, let me just type it up and get out of here because it was bad. And they're like, no, you've got to practice these things. So I'm like, no, I'm not doing this. I don't deserve this. I'm not worth this because look at how bad I messed everything up. That's shadow. I don't deserve it. I'm not worth it. Look how bad I messed things up. Just let me get out of here. That's shadow work. And those are the shadows telling me I don't deserve this stuff. But the whisperers were like, no, you need to learn this stuff. You need to apply it to yourself. You need to do this because the messenger has to be the message. You have to show people this works through the stuff that you've done. We've hit the reset button, learn it. And so I learned it. I started teaching it. Life got so much better. It got magical. And so the more I do this shadow work, the more I look at these deep, dark places that are uncomfortable. They're scary. You get into scarcity, you get into fear, you get into us versus them. And us versus them will always surprise you. You may not even realize you have an us versus them inside you, but we do. It'll suddenly pop up and you're like, oh, look at that. Well, those are shadow traits. And shadow traits don't mean anger, jealousy, upset, discrimination. That it isn't just that, but it can also be accommodating people because we don't want to say no. We're like, oh no, I have to say yes. I have to do this for people or they're going to hate me. Well, that's shadow work. One of my favorite ways of working with shadow work with spiritual people is they come to me and they're like, I've been doing my spiritual work for years. I've been meditating. I have been doing this stuff and that stuff. But the other day, I just got so mad at somebody and I yelled at them. And that just means I'm still connected to lower level energies. That means I'm still a lower level being. And I'm like, wait, why did you yell at this person? And then we get into what their anger was about and realize their anger was about boundary. They found a boundary. They set a boundary. They were protecting themselves. The anger wasn't the shadow. The shadow was the guilt, the negative self-talk that they're this lower level being, that they're an awful person because they got angry. That was the shadow. It's what I call a meta shadow. And so when we do the work around that shadow, they realize, oh no, anger can be a powerfully positive thing for me because it protects me. It tells me I'm important, that I'm worthwhile, and the things I believe and think and do are worthwhile. And that anger is a way of doing that. The shadow was other people telling me I was horrible because I was angry. No, I'm not. So shadow work takes on all of these different forms to help you reset your life, to go in a new direction, to help you better understand who you are. Because who you really are tends to get hidden under the shadows of who you thought you had to be. And when we start to resolve those shadows and we learn those lessons, you find who you are authentically. You're living an authentic life, and it's like, oh, now all of that stuff makes sense. So if you're floundering, you're stuck, you're hitting like the hamster wheel, you can't go anywhere no matter how much energy you're spending, you're feeling burnt out, you have to do shadow work. If you're hitting roadblocks after roadblock, you have to do shadow work. And what's it like in life when you do your shadow work? Things come to you magically. It's like synchronicities just happen. You think of something that you need, you know it's something that you're in attune to, you're aligned to, it just happens. You don't have to chase the ideal lover. You don't have to get the right car for you. You don't have to get the job. It comes to you. When you're doing your shadow work, you recognize when people are trying to push their shadows onto you. Mm-hmm. You recognize like, hey, here's a dream. Here's something big I want to do. And somebody comes up to you and goes, that's a really dumb idea because no one ever done that before. You go, oh, that's your fear. That's your fear of new things. That's not mine. I don't have to take that on. You get to go do your work now. You can go do your work. I'm going to go do my work. This is especially important for family members. Like if we grew up in toxic families, there's no such thing as an unbroken family. Every family has something broken. And when you're doing your development and your growth, and a sibling or a parent reaches out to you and goes, oh, what are you doing? You're not like that. You can go, cool, hey, I recognize that's your path that you're working on. You don't say that. You recognize that internally. You recognize, I recognize that's your path that you're working on. Good luck on that. I wish you well in taking your work. And I'm not taking on your shadows. I'm going to continue being who I am. And I'm going to let you continue being who you are. So now you're not being dragged down by that parent or the sibling going, oh, why are you doing that stuff? What's wrong with you? You're like, oh, cool. You'll get it someday. Don't worry. And so shadow work is amazing to get you free from all of that stuff and living authentically.
Thank you. I love that. How do we switch directions as a collective for humanity? Do you believe our higher selves is trying to make us switch directions right now with all the chaos going on?
We are doing it. We are doing it 100%. And I think I got to coin that phrase, service of self to be service to others. You've got to do your spiritual work. You've got to do your shadow work individually. Because when you do your work individually and you clear yourself from that, and you rise above the narrative, you're actually putting that information to the collective unconscious. You're making it easier for other people to do it. When you shine with your own light, you're illuminating the people around you, making it easier for them to access their light and shine with their own light. So it starts with you. If we want to change the world and we want to have this collective shift, beautiful, we're doing it. But remember, you are an individual working for the collective, towards the collective. So do your work for you, because that's all you can really understand. And the more you do that, the more we're causing the shift. It's already happening. So if you watch the news, you look at social media, you see the things that are triggering you, that are activating your emotional states, look for that contrast. That contrast tells you what your purpose is in this world. Those things that are really pissing you off are the things that are breaking your heart. That's your purpose in this world. And it's not to go against them, by the way. We're not here to go against anything. We're not here to destroy the cabal. We're not here to destroy shadow governments. We're not here to destroy anything. Remember, that's their path. The people that are participating in that, that's their path. You let them have their path. You let them do their thing. You create your path. You create what's right for you, and you will connect. You will connect with other people who are on that path. The more you shine your light authentically, the more you will draw people to you that share that path, and you create that together through your individual work. And then those old systems will no longer work. People will go away from those old systems to the new systems that are working. So we're not destroying anything, we're creating it. So again, you do your individual work for the collective.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that's so easy to do, is forget that that's their path. And my mind at times wants to correct people and change them, and that's their path. And I got to respect that. So thank you for reminding me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And yeah, absolutely right. Well, we respect that, because there's still a need. They still have to put that contrast into the world so that we know what we need to grow against, grow above. So we still need that contrast. And that might be their higher self-agreement in this world to provide that contrast for us to grow through. So we let them have that.
Well, thank you. I love that. And how do we find you? How do we find your links and your books and so on?
I'm Facebook, Instagram. Just look for my name and my website, Kaedrich.com, Kaedrich.com. Again, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. My book is Runes for Transformation. It's on Amazon. It'll probably be at your favorite local metaphysical bookstore as well. So I'm all over the place.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for coming on. I really highly love and respect you as a human being. I think you're awesome, and I appreciate you coming on and taking the time. So thank you. And I'm going to end it with the Thich Nhat Hanh quote. He's one of my favorite teachers that touched my heart. And he says, a bodhisattva doesn't have to be perfect. Anyone who is aware of what is happening and who tries to wake up other people is a bodhisattva. We're all bodhisattvas doing our best. And you're doing a great job. So thank you.
Thank you. I love that.
Thank you. Well, take care.
Thanks. You too. You take care. This was awesome.
Yeah, it was. Hopefully we can do it again in the future. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
You. Thank you.
Great.
Just know we out here. Know we out here working in a major way. Had to speak on it just to make a break. Any given subject, know we make a way. Time to level up on a day-to-day. Know we out here working for the greater good. Expand your mind, broaden your lens the way you should. From the stars to the galaxy to speak on spirituality. Higher understanding for the neighborhood.